G'day viewers, if you've ever set up a dirted tank, you've seen a dirted tank, or even if you've only heard of a dirted tank, you've probably heard that the two biggest problems are one, all those nutrients that get released into the water column when you set it up, which always leads to an algae problem. And number two is as all that organic matter rots down underneath the sand cap, all those gas bubbles get released, which we don't really want. Well, I'm about to show you how I set up a dirted tank and I don't get either of those problems, so stay tuned. And also this will double as one of my Aquariums and Aquascapes Australia videos where we try and answer all the beginner questions that are common on the internet. So for Australian viewers, I'm going to use all the soil, sand and everything else from Bunnings. So if you've ever wondered what to use, you're about to find out, so stick around for that. Now where I live, the weather is glorious, but the soil is absolute crap. It's a really hard clay limestone and it's not suitable at all really for a dirted tank. So it looks like we're off to Bunnings. Rightio, for our soil, so we're off to Bunnings, which is our chain hardware store for those viewers overseas. And we're going to head off to the garden section and get the cheapest garden soil mix. There's no wetting agent in it and there's no fertilizers in it, which makes it ideal. And yeah, it's the cheapest stuff there, so that's even more of a bonus. And in the next row over, I like to use this coarse river sand. It's a very natural feel. It's more of a browny sort of colour. You do need to give it a really good wash as any other sand, but I really like it. But if you want something a little bit whiter and cleaner, head up to the building section and use this white wash sand. It's a lot whiter. It's not ridiculously white, but it's whiter than the stuff from the garden centre. And then while we're there, we're going to get some dolomite lime, which is what we're going to use for magnesium and calcium. And we'll grab some sulfate of potash. Now that's going to give us some potassium and a little bit of sulfur. Right, so once we get home, it's time to treat that cheap garden soil. Now here's where the magic happens. So just open up our bag and first off give it a screen. Depending on the bag you get on the batch, sometimes it contains a lot of pieces of stick and wood and bark and things, and others aren't so bad, but regardless of what you get, give it a good screed and get all those large pieces of wood out. And this one's not too bad. That's all we've got left over there, so we throw that in the garden and then we'll screed the rest of the bag, and then it's on to step 2. Now step 2 is very easy. We'll just fill the container with water and then we'll let it soak for a good few hours. I did it in the late afternoon, so I just let it soak overnight. So I've let that soak overnight and all those small pieces of bark and wood have all floated to the top. So I'll just carefully scoop off as much of that as I can. Then I'm going to roll out a plastic sheet and tip our soil on. And I can tell you right now, that smells like a rat ate some stinky cheese, crawled up a sewer pipe and died. It absolutely stinks. It's rotten. So we're going to spread that out. The idea being, when the soil is in contact with both moisture and air, there's enzymes that will break down all those organics. So we spread that to expose as much of the wet soil as to the air as we possibly can. And then as the top layer dries, I'll come out and run my fingers through it or a rake over it to turn it over to expose the damper stuff underneath to the air. Then once it's all dry, I'll put it back in the tub and the process starts all over again. So as I said, the idea is to have those enzymes break down all of those organics before we put it in the tank, because it's those organics rotting down under the sand cap, which is causing all our drama. So if we can get it all out of the way beforehand, all the better. So we fill that tub up, fill it up full of water, and we're going to repeat this 3, maybe 4 times, and we'll know when it's ready to go, because instead of feeling like soil, like soft and squishy, it'll feel a bit more like sand. It'll be more grainy. And so after soaking and drying 4 times, this is what we end up with. Beautiful, nice sand, and there is no smell whatsoever. Lovely, we're all ready to go, so let's take this inside. So now first off, we're going to sprinkle a little bit of that potash for our potassium and a little bit of that dolomite lime for our magnesium and calcium. And now I'm adding some fluorite, the original stuff, and this is for iron. If you don't have that, you could use like a red clay that you use for pottery. And if you're really keen, you can mix that up and then with the soil as a mud. And then so once it's capped, if you ever pull a plant out, instead of all the soil going everywhere, the clay will help hold that all together. But I don't have clay, I have fluorite, so I'm going to spread that out for the iron. And now we spread on our treated soil. I only want a depth about 1 inch deep or so, and make sure we'll spray it down to keep that dust down, especially inside. And now I cut this piece of wood to make it fit in. I've taken a piece off the bottom so it'll sit nice and flat, and then I've had to break the tops off so it'll fit inside the tank, using very accurate professional measuring there. Just do it by eye. Now that we've got the stick to fit, this is just some 3mm acrylic that I had left over, so I've cut it, I think it's about 4 inches wide, and I'll fit that there, and the idea being that's going to be a barrier because I intend to plant some Vallisneria behind it. And if you've ever grown val, it goes nuts and takes over the whole tank. So this will be a bit of a barrier to stop those runners going through the soil, and if they go over the top, I'll be able to see them and trim them off as required. Now for the sand cap, that's going to cap all that soil down. I'm going to use our Bunnings coarse river sand, and unfortunately, because it's not pool filter sand, we're going to have to clean it, and it's pretty dirty stuff. So it's just a matter of running the hose in the bucket and keep sloshing it around, tip all that clay and dirty water out, and we keep going till that water comes out clear. Pretty straightforward. There we go, water coming out nice and clean. So we'll tip this out, and then we'll clean another bucket full because we're going to need about 3 or 4. And now it's just a matter of capping all of that soil, and we make sure we get under that stick as well. And this will stop our soil from floating out, and any nutrients in the soil, hopefully it'll reduce them from getting into the water column. Now I'm just going to throw in these breeding caves because I plan on putting some butterfly plecos in here. And there's the barrier there, so hopefully we can keep the val on this side and the rest of the tank on the other side, but here's hoping. Now speaking of val, I'll grab some out of this tank, which coincidentally was made using the same method, so you can see how well the stuff will grow. So we'll grab a few runners out there and then plant them in our new tank. I'm just going to plant that val straight in all the way along the back. Although if your tank is already set up, a really good tip for growing val is to just let it float in the tank, and then that way the roots can get their nutrients out of the water. They don't have to try and grow and search for it in the substrate. And then once you get really good roots and some runners, and then you plant them, and it'll take off a lot faster. Now back to my little grow out tank, and this is some Amazon sword. It's Echinodorus frilli. It's the long narrowed leaf. I really like it. And this one has flowered and shot out a few babies. So we'll separate those and we'll plant them out. Now I lashed out and ordered some plants from the Scape Shop, which I think is scapeshop.com.au. I paid for these, it's not sponsored or anything, but yeah, they're really good. They're all swords, and I asked nicely and they labelled them individually for me so I knew which variety was which. But I won't list them all and show you planting all one at a time because this video is probably going to be long enough, so I'll just stick those in. So now viewers, I've planted some Val and I'm planting Amazon swords, which are all heavy root feeders. They're not water column feeders. I'm not going to plant any stem plants or any epiphytes or anything. And the idea is to really test out this method to see, in theory, if it's going to release a lot of nutrients and stuff into the water column. We're just going to have heaps of algae because there's going to be nothing to use it. I'm going to put one floater in just to see how well it does. If it really takes off, it means nutrients are making their way into the water column. But if it struggles, it means our mineralization, our soil treatment has worked. So let's just see. Time will tell. So now we've finished planting. It's not heavily planted like you would normally start off a planted tank. So we're filled full of water, and those bubbles there are just, yeah, the air bubbles under the sand. It hasn't even had time to rot down and create gas bubbles, if that's what it was going to do. So we'll just leave that and see how it goes. Now we're about 3 or 4 weeks in. I've had to throw this breeding pair of angels in because I had nowhere else to put them. But we haven't got a lot of growth. The frilli's going pretty well, but everything else is just settling in, I think, finding its way. But we haven't got heaps of algae, but we just do have some brown diatom algae. So you're going to expect that in a new tank, but it's not too bad in here at all. Very little on the front. Most of that is on the back because the light's towards the back. And we've got a bit on a few of those broader leaves, but I'm not too worried about that. That's just part of the cycle. Okay, so this is what it looked like when we first filled it full of water, and 2 and a bit months later, this is what we're at now. Everything's growing really well, and there's no algae and no gas bubbles to speak of, not a single one. The swords are absolutely loving it. The Val's taking right off, and I did have some antler fern and some salvinia floating in the top, and they didn't die, but they didn't really grow. So clearly there was very few nutrients in that water column. There's no green algae whatsoever. We had that little bit of brown algae during the setup, and there might be 1 or 2 spots of algae here and there, a little bit on a couple of those leaves, but considering it's a dirted tank, I think it's done pretty well. And just to prove that this one wasn't a fluke, here's a tank I set up about 2 weeks after, and this is my crypt tank with a little bit of bacopa in the back and some liliopsis for ground cover. This one's going really well, although this one had a little bit more algae in it, and this one, because there's no canister on it, there's not a lot of flow. This one's getting a little bit of cyanobacteria or blue-green algae in a couple of patches in the substrate. But I'll just let them go, and then once the plants take right over, hopefully it'll shade them out and we'll be fine. But anyway, viewers, probably bored you long enough. That's my dirted tank. If you like leaving likes, leave a like. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.